The forgotten papers they found the first set of letters sealed inside a wall, brittle, soot-stained and addressed to no one. Each bore the crest of Blackthorn Manor and a date, January 1848. What began as a renovation soon became an exhumation of history itself. Welcome back. Before we continue, like, subscribe, share. In the winter of 1848, the town of Fairvale lay smothered beneath a silence so thick it felt deliberate. The Blackthorn estate sat at its edge, overlooking the river like a sentinel of guilt, its chimneys long cold, its windows boarded. The locals said the house had been empty since the death of Colonel Nathaniel Blackthorn, though no one agreed on what had killed him. Some claimed fever, others whispered about something buried, something that breathed beneath the cellar stones. For nearly 20 years the estate had been abandoned, its legacy spoken only in fragments and warnings. But in 1923, a historian named Elias Marin began cataloging the property for a state records project. That's when he found the letters. They were written by Isadora Blackthorn, Nathaniel's only daughter. Entries torn from a diary, scattered across several rooms. The handwriting was frantic, trembling. Her words were half confession, half prayer. "If anyone finds this, know that I tried to stop him, but the sickness was in the blood and the house would not let it end." The first entry was dated November 1847, and what it described would unravel one of Virginia's quietest atrocities. Isadora had returned to the manor after 2 years away in Richmond, summoned by her father under the pretense of family business. The colonel's letters spoke of her mother's failing health, yet when Isadora arrived, the woman was gone. Not buried, not missing, simply gone. The servants avoided her eyes, rooms had been sealed off. Portraits draped in black, the air reeked faintly of carbolic acid. The smell doctors used to scrub away infection, or evidence. The colonel himself had changed. The war hero turned patriarch now walked with a limp and carried a constant tremor in his hands. He avoided the daylight, spoke in riddles about preserving the family line, and spent his nights locked in the old nursery where no child had lived in years. According to Isadora's later letters, she began hearing movement in the walls, scratching, sometimes faint, sometimes frantic. Her father dismissed it as rats, but she noticed him posting guards outside the nursery door each night, as if something inside required containment. By December, the household had begun to unravel. Servants fled without collecting pay. One, a housemaid named Lydia, left behind a single note. "The child cries when he sleeps. I will not stay." No one knew what she meant by the child. In one of Isadora's surviving pages, she described a small wooden box her father carried everywhere. He kept it close, even at the breakfast table. Once, when he dropped his cane, she caught a glimpse of its contents. A lock of hair, gray and brittle, bound with black ribbon. The initials carved inside the lid read E.B. Her mother's name was Eleanor Blackthorn. Isadora's tone shifted after that discovery. The early letters carried a daughter's worry. The later ones read like a survivor's record. "He thinks the blood can be cured," she wrote. "He says our name will not die as long as the flesh endures. I do not think he sleeps anymore." In early January 1848, a blizzard sealed Fairvale under 3 feet of snow. Supply wagons couldn't reach the property. The few servants remaining, old Samuel, the groundskeeper, and Ruth, the cook, were trapped there with the colonel and his daughter. That was when the noises grew louder. Ruth testified years later before the county board that she heard weeping in the walls during that storm, a woman's voice, low and broken. Samuel claimed he saw the colonel carrying something heavy down to the root cellar at dawn, wrapped in a bloodied quilt. 2 nights later, the fire started. No one could ever prove if it was deliberate, but the eastern wing burned to the ground before dawn. When townsmen reached the manor at sunrise, they found Colonel Blackthorn standing in the snow, barefoot, staring at the smoke. His hands were covered in soot and blood. He said only one thing: "It's done. The house is clean." Isadora was never found. The case became a local obsession for years, then faded into folklore. But in 1923, when Elias Marin opened the sealed nursery, he found the final letter wedged beneath a floorboard. The ink was faint but legible. He told me it wasn't death, only continuation, but I have seen what he made. It wears my mother's face, but not her soul. When the river freezes, I will run. If I do not return, bury what's left beneath the willow. Marin wrote in his field notes that he did indeed find a shallow pit beneath the willow by the riverbank. Inside it was a small wooden box, the same described in the letters. Inside the box was hair, not gray this time, but dark, newly cut. He sealed the room that day and left the estate. 3 months later, he was found drowned in that same river, his notebook missing. Some say the manor still stands, though no road leads to it now. Others say it sank into the marsh when the river changed its course. But on quiet nights, when fog rolls in from the lowlands, locals claim they can still see the outline of its chimneys in the mist and hear the faint cry of something that was once human. The house that wouldn't sleep. They say the fire should have consumed everything. Yet somehow the heart of the house endured, the western hall, the nursery, the study, all the rooms the colonel had used most. When the ashes cooled, Fairvale's constable filed only a brief report, loss of structure due to winter blaze, one confirmed death, Colonel N. Blackthorne. No mention of the missing daughter, no mention of the cellar, and so the manor slept but uneasily. In 1923, Elias Marin's papers revealed what the town refused to remember. His early notes described the smell first, a sweet rot beneath the floorboards, like sap left too long in the sun. He thought it was mildew, until he found the remnants of a lock on the cellar door, fused by heat, and a trail of salt scattered around it. Salt, in heavy, deliberate lines, he wrote. The colonel was not trying to keep something out. He was trying to keep it in. Marin's fascination with the Blackthorne lineage became almost pathological. In letters to the Virginia Historical Society, he compared their records with parish ledgers and medical journals from Richmond. One pattern emerged again and again. Every generation bore signs of hemoclastia, a rare disorder of the blood causing tissue decay and psychological instability, except there was no record of the Blackthorns seeking medical aid. Instead, he found references to a Dr. R. Tavers, a surgeon whose practice was dissolved in 1846 following accusations of anatomical theft. Tavers had signed the colonel's military discharge papers years before the fire. In Marin's handwriting, faint in the margin, he brought his doctor home with him. The surviving structure of the manor, as Marin described it, felt unnatural. The floor plan defied symmetry. Corridors curved where walls should have ended. He wrote that some rooms echoed twice, as though there were two spaces folded into one. He noted, the nursery door opens but does not close. During his first visit, the local caretaker, an aging man named Jonas Reeve, refused to step inside. When pressed, Reeve said he'd been there once before, as a boy, when his father helped with the reconstruction after the fire. The walls bled, sir. He told Marin, not fast, but enough to notice. We scrubbed it, but it came again when the sun went down. In the following weeks, Marin continued cataloging, sketching floor plans and transcribing inscriptions he found carved into the wood, Latin phrases scratched by a trembling hand. Corpus serva, sanguis memor, preserve the body. The blood remembers. He was not the first to see those words. A 19th century court document later surfaced describing strange marks found at the scene, dismissed by investigators as hysteria. Marin copied them carefully and sent a rubbing to the University of Virginia's Department of Medicine, asking if they related to any known anatomical rituals. He never received a reply. By mid-March, Marin's field notes began to read less like research and more like confession. His handwriting shifted. Letters slanted downward, ink pooled in blots. I hear the scratching again, though I am alone. One page reads, perhaps mice, but the sound moves with me. He began sleeping inside the manor, citing the need to understand the structure acoustically. Locals claimed they saw lamplight in the upper window at all hours, moving back and forth like a pendulum. One neighbor, Mrs. Clara Dunn, told the Fairvale Chronicle years later that she visited Marin in April to deliver a letter from the historical board. He answered the door, pale, shaking, eyes red. Behind him she glimpsed a child's cradle rocking. When she asked about it, he said, "It's only the drafts." There was no wind that day. Marin's last complete entry is dated April 19th, 1923. The house resists closure. It wakes when touched. Every record of this family is a wound. It will not scar. I have sealed the cellar once more, but the air down there is breathing still. The wood moves beneath my hand. He included a sketch of the basement layout. The drawing shows a chamber beyond the known foundation, marked only with a question mark. No such chamber appears in county blueprints. Weeks later, Reeve returned to find Marin gone. His belongings were scattered, papers soaked by rain from a broken window. On the table lay one object, a key, blackened with soot, its teeth filed unevenly. Beside it, scrawled on the wall in charcoal, "Not all inheritances are meant to be claimed." The constable's report lists Marin as missing, presumed drowned. The key was turned over to local archives, where it remains today in a sealed glass case labeled only, item #23B, source Blackthorn property. Decades passed, the story dulled to rumor again. Children dared one another to walk past the ruins. Hunters claimed they heard voices when the fog rolled in, one deep, one small, calling from beneath the soil. But in 1971, construction crews clearing land near the old estate uncovered a buried foundation. Stone, circular, with fragments of laboratory glass fused into the earth. A rusted plaque was found nearby, the lettering half, erased by time, property of R. Tavers, M.D. Inside the foundation were traces of bone, some human, some not, and with them a single metal tag stamped E.B. 1848. They reburied what they found, of course, sealed the site, paved over it, and let the story fade again. But for those who still live in Fairvale, the nights when the river fog creeps in are uneasy ones. Dogs refuse to bark, windows frost from within, and every few years, when the thaw comes late, the river gives back something, sometimes a jawbone, sometimes a lock of hair bound in ribbon. The Blackthorn name may be gone, but the blood remembers. The doctor's ledger, when Dr. Rupert Tavers first arrived in Fairvale in 1845, no one quite knew what to make of him. He was polite, measured, and carried a surgeon's case that he never allowed out of his sight. His credentials, as printed in the Richmond Medical Register, were impeccable. Educated in Edinburgh, later appointed to the Confederate field hospitals during the early campaigns. But by the time he came to the Blackthorn estate, he had already been accused twice of practices unfit for Christian medicine. The records of those accusations survive only in fragments. One, a statement from an assistant named Caleb Prout, claimed that Tavers kept the dead too long and made them speak in ways not of this world. After that, his name disappeared from public record until 1847, when he appears again, this time listed as resident physician at Blackthorn Manor. In the surviving letters found by Elias Marin, Tavers is mentioned only indirectly. Isadora refers to him as father's friend, though her tone drips with suspicion. "He smells of vinegar and iron. He smiles too wide. I hear them speak late at night, of bones that still grow and veins that can be taught to remember." Marin's later research turned up a notebook belonging to Tavers, recovered from a private collection in Richmond. It was mislabeled for years as an anatomical journal, but, once translated, revealed something else entirely, a blend of medical observation, mysticism, and obsession. The first entry reads, "The decay of the flesh need not be permanent. The blood is a language. It only forgets when the body ceases to speak." Tavers described his work at Blackthorn Manor as a study of hereditary deterioration. He wrote of the colonel's family line as if they were specimens, not people. There are notes about the mother, Eleanor Blackthorn, her tremors, discoloration, lucid intervals. He observed that her symptoms worsened at nightfall, that her blood congealed too quickly outside the body. He called this condition V. By his calculations, it could be arrested if one transfused blood from a close relative. He believed that the family's degeneration was caused not by disease but by memory itself, an ancestral echo that passed through the generations, growing more pronounced with each birth. To cure them, he wrote, I must teach the blood to forget. In another passage, one so stained with fluid it nearly dissolve, Tavers describes the first procedure. It was done in the nursery on a subject of female sex, aged 38. Elinor, the husband, restrained her. The note reads, he loves her dearly and thus will not mind the pain. The girl will be next. He drained Elinor's blood into glass basins and replaced it with that of her daughter. He wrote of how the two heartbeats struggled to reconcile, and how, for a moment, he thought he had succeeded. The pulse steadied, the eyes cleared, then the veins turned black. He wrote only one more line that night. She spoke in another voice. After Elinor's death, the colonel sealed off half the manor. Tavers continued his experiments with samples he kept preserved in carbolic solution. He noted how the tissue quivered when warmed. By December 1847, his journal becomes fragmented, frantic. The girl resists. Her blood rejects the communion. The father has grown fearful, yet still obeys. The cellar hums when the moon is full. The solution breathes. In one section, he sketches a design, an inverted cruciform chamber with a drain running beneath the foundation. He called it the memory well. Marin's 1923 blueprints match its description precisely. In March of 1848, the experiments ceased abruptly. The final pages of the ledger contain only observations of decay and silence. One entry stands out, written in a shaking hand. She calls from the walls, says she is cold, says she can see her mother's eyes through the keyhole. That line was written the same week as the fire. When the constable later entered the ruins, he noted the smell of burnt alcohol and blood. In his testimony, he mentioned surgical debris, clamps, tubing, vials labeled only with initials. He did not record their contents. The ledger vanishes from record after that until Marin's discovery nearly a century later. In 1924, after Marin's death, a sealed packet addressed to the Historical Society arrived without sender. Inside were 4 pages of the ledger, wrapped in wax paper, and one glass vial containing a clot of dark material suspended in fluid. The curator at the time, Dr. Leslie Vaughan, described it in her notes. The sample is still pliant, as though not fully dead. 2 months later, she resigned without explanation and left Virginia altogether. The packet remains in the archive, mislabeled as Miscellaneous Medical. In 1956, when Fairvale General Hospital was expanded, workers unearthed several rusted containers buried near the riverbank. Inside one was a brass plate etched with the initials R.T. and a half-legible inscription, "The body will remember the cure." The contents of the containers were confiscated by the county, but the inventory list, declassified in 1987, mentions organic matter preserved in unknown solution. The containers were never relocated. What makes the case of Tavers so haunting isn't only what he did, but how quietly it was forgotten. No trial, no gravestone, no official record of death. Just a patter. Each generation rediscovering his work, each paying for it in silence. When locals spoke of the sickness, they meant it literally. The sense that the house itself was unwell, that its wood and stone had absorbed every incision and prayer uttered inside it. Sometimes on damp mornings, visitors swear they can still smell vinegar and iron near the ruins. And once, just once, a tourist who ignored the warnings claimed to have found something buried in the mud behind the willow tree, a fragment of bone, carved with 2 words in careful surgical script, sanguis memor, the blood remembers. The daughter's confession, the confession of Isadora Langford, was found in 1891, sealed inside a porcelain doll's torso unearthed from the ash pit behind what remained of Blackthorn Manor. It was written in a thin, slanted hand, feminine but steady, and preserved well enough for most of the ink to survive. No record explains how it ended up inside the doll, though the placement feels intentional. The first line reads simply, "They told me my mother died of fever. I know now she was killed to keep her memory from spreading." The confession begins 6 weeks after Eleanor's death in the first thaw of 1848. Isadora describes the house as half abandoned, its servants dismissed, her father withdrawn. The once proud manor had gone silent, save for the soft, rhythmic knocking that began every night at 2 o'clock from somewhere beneath the floors. Father says it's the pipes, but we have no pipes. The sound has weight, it carries heat, as if someone is striking flesh. She writes that her father had taken to locking the cellar door and sleeping in his study. Tavers still visited occasionally, his shoes always leaving damp, reddish prints on the wood. He smells of wine and rust. He calls me by my mother's name sometimes. Once I saw him watching me through the glass of the greenhouse, but when I looked again, there was only fog. By March, Isadora's tone grows frantic. She describes dreams where her mother stands at the foot of her bed, whispering backwards. The air tastes metallic, candles burn blue. She mentions that her reflection sometimes moves differently, slower, as if remembering a gesture she no longer recalls. I have begun to bleed from my nose when the moon is high. I think the blood is trying to leave me. The journal turns darker still when she mentions finding the memory well. It began with a noise, a hollow clinking, like glass tapping stone. She followed it through the kitchen, past the servant's stair, and found the small brass door hidden behind a shelf of coal buckets. Inside, a staircase spiraling downward into cold, damp air. The walls were sweating, the steps hummed beneath my feet, and at the bottom I found the basin. The basin, she writes, was made of carved stone, shaped like an open palm. Inside it, liquid darker than tar rippled, though no draught stirred it. Floating on the surface was her mother's locket, its chain twisted with black hair. When I touched the edge, I saw her face, not as she was, but as she had become. Her eyes were full of light, and she said, "Give it back." Isadora ran. The following entries spiral between lucidity and fever. She writes of her father standing at her bedside, holding a syringe filled with what he called remedy. He told her the sickness was returning, that her mother's condition had been inherited. She describes the sting of the needle, the rush of ice through her veins, and the way the walls pulsed like breathing skin. I awoke in the study. There was blood on the ceiling. I think he gave me my mother's. She notes that after this treatment, she could hear everything, the worms in the garden soil, the ticks of the grandfather clock, even her father's heart. She says it beat irregularly, like something trying to remember how to live. On April 11th, 1848, the handwriting changes, smaller, sharper. She refers to herself in third person, as if she were observing from outside. The girl wears her mother's face now. The house accepts her. The doctor smiles when he looks at her, because he knows the cure is working. That same night, she writes of finding her father dead in his chair, his mouth filled with salt and petals, his hands folded as if in prayer. She insists she didn't kill him, but the entry ends with a line that chills even now. "He tried to make me forget, but I am the memory." After that, only one more entry survives, dated April 14th, 1848. Tavers came again. He brought a trunk lined with mirrors. He said we were to travel north, that my blood was a gift to be studied. I waited until he slept. The well was hungry. I rolled him down the steps. The sound it made when he hit the bottom was like the first knock I ever heard. The page ends there, except for a single word scrawled diagonally in the margin, pressed so hard it tore through the paper. "Remember." Historians believe this was the final record of the Langford line. Within a week, the manor caught fire, possibly set by Isadora herself. She was never found, though several witnesses claimed to have seen a young woman walking barefoot along the ridge road at dawn, her dress torn, her hands dripping with something darker than blood. In 1904, a skeleton was discovered near the ruins of a railway tunnel 5 miles north of Fairvale. It was female, with traces of glass embedded in the ribs, as if she had swallowed a mirror. The coroner's note describes one final anomaly. The heart cavity contained a hardened substance resembling tree sap. When warmed, it appeared to pulse faintly. Today, locals avoid the sight of Blackthorn Manor. Even the earth there seems wrong, reddish, faintly warm, refusing to grow anything but a kind of pale moss that smells faintly of iron. Hikers say that if you press your ear to the ground, you can hear a soft knocking just beneath the soil. 1, 2, 3, a pause, then faintly 4, as if someone somewhere is still counting. The well beneath the ashes, the ruins of Blackthorn Manor, were first excavated in 1968 during a state historical survey of antebellum estates destroyed in the final months of the Civil War. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Malcolm Ferris, described the site in his preliminary report as unnaturally preserved, layered like compacted parchment, the ground beneath retaining moisture without decay. What they uncovered was not the manor itself, it had burned completely, but the substructure, a warren of cellars and tunnels that no blueprint or ledger had ever recorded. At the center stood a circular chamber of blackened brick, 20 feet wide, its walls inscribed with faint marks that, under lamplight, appeared to shimmer. It smelled of rust, lime, and something faintly sweet, like spoiled fruit, Ferris wrote. There was a depression in the center shaped like a bowl, and the brick beneath it had melted, as though exposed to tremendous heat from within. They had found the memory well. Among the debris, researchers discovered several warped iron tools, a glass syringe with a bone handle, and what appeared to be the remnants of surgical tables, burned but intact enough to suggest medical use. Ferris's notes mentioned that one table was shorter than the others, sized for a child or small adult. There were stains, dark and glossy even after a century. When tested, the residue contained hemoglobin and traces of mercury and sap resin. If this was a laboratory, it was one devoted to transfusion or experimentation on tissue preservation, wrote Ferris's assistant Helen Warren in her private diary. He calls it science, I call it resurrection. On June 3, 1968, Ferris authorized the removal of several bricks from the well's rim. Beneath, they found layers of sealed glass jars, each containing preserved biological specimens. One jar held a cluster of teeth fused to what appeared to be human hair. Another contained a small, shriveled hand, its fingers stitched together with copper wire. A third jar, larger than the rest, held only murky fluid, but when exposed to light, something inside twitched. The footage from that day is lost. The university claims the reels degraded, but Helen Warren's diary records what the camera failed to capture. The liquid began to vibrate when the generator came on. The glass flexed outward as if breathing. Ferris shouted for the lights to be cut. I heard it then, a slow, deliberate tapping from within the well, once, twice, thrice, then silence. We left the chamber immediately. She adds one final line beneath it, something was counting us. The excavation shut down 3 days later after a fire broke out in the supply tent, destroying most of the samples. Dr. Ferris blamed a faulty kerosene lamp, though the local fire chief noted that the flames burned green and left no ash, only a slick residue that corroded the metal tools. Ferris and his team left the site by July, and official reports declared it unsafe for further research. But Helen Warren returned, alone. Her car was found a week later, abandoned near the Ridge Road, the driver's door open, the keys still in the ignition. In the passenger seat sat her field journal and a jar, empty, except for a faint reddish stain along the bottom. She was never found. 30 years later, in 1998, her nephew, Dr. Elias Warren, a cultural historian at the University of Richmond, reopened the investigation. He'd grown up hearing whispers about his aunt's disappearance and the well that remembered. He obtained her diary through the archives and spent months reconstructing Ferris's original excavation. In an interview recorded that year, he said, "Every family has a ghost story. Ours just happens to have coordinates." Dr. Warren led a new team to the Blackthorn site on October 12, 1998. What they found defied every preservation theory. The ground was still warm, faintly damp, as though something below was generating heat. Moss covered the stones, and the faint pattern of the manor's foundations was still visible, outlined in reddish soil. They uncovered the same cellar, the same well, the same sensation of soundless pressure in the air. And though no electrical equipment would function within 50 feet, the team reported hearing the same tapping Ferris had described, 3 knocks followed by silence. When they poured a small amount of groundwater into the depression to test its depth, the liquid was absorbed instantly, leaving only a faint hiss. Moments later, the water seeped back up, darker, thicker, with a smell of copper and smoke. Dr. Warren dipped a glass rod into it. When he withdrew it, a film of oily residue clung to the glass, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. That night, he didn't sleep. He recorded 6 hours of whispered notes, describing shapes moving along the cellar walls and the feeling of being observed through a lens made of flesh. The final entry from his field recorder is timestamped 2:14 a.m. It's not the well that remembers. It's the blood. The blood never left. Dr. Warren vanished the following morning. His tent was intact, his notes stacked neatly beside his cot. Only the recorder remained, still running, capturing 12 minutes of distant knocking before the batteries died. The university closed the project permanently in 1999. The site was reburied, fenced, and listed as private historical property access restricted. Yet hikers still report strange phenomena, compasses spinning erratically, phones losing battery within minutes, the faint smell of burning fruit carried on windless days. Some say the knocking continues. Muffled now, deeper, others claim the moss covering the ruins shifts, forming words if you look long enough, letters that spell out names long buried in the Langford archives. The curse of Blackthorn Manor, it seems, was never about one family's sins. It was about memory itself, how it clings, how it seeps, how it refuses to die. Every generation digs too deep, and every time the same thing happens. The well wakes up, the inheritance of flesh. When Dr. Elias Warren's effects were catalogued after his disappearance, archivists discovered an unlabeled folio among his papers. Inside were copies of letters exchanged between Dr. Malcolm Ferris and a physician named Dr. Alaric Hensley, dated between April 1848 and December 1850, a century before the excavation. The handwriting was delicate, the ink brown with oxidation. At the top of the first page, in faint graphite, Elias had written original correspondence found within Langford Medical Library, misfiled under agrarian records. The letters chronicled the experiments that would later be mythologized as the well cure, conducted by Dr. Tobias Langford, the manor's final patriarch. But in these documents, the name Langford had been struck out and replaced crudely with Hensley. Whether this was Ferris's doing or someone before him remains unclear. The first letter, dated April 12, 1848, opens with an account of a patient afflicted by congenital exhaustion of the blood. Dr. Hensley writes, "The child's skin is translucent, the pulse irregular yet strong. She speaks lucidly of dreams preceding her conception, claiming to remember a place without light, where her mother's voice was carried through walls of water. This child, unnamed in the correspondence, was likely Catherine Hensley, age 6, the last surviving heir of the Blackthorn estate." A month later, Hensley reports an attempted treatment, the transfusion of her blood with a substance derived from distilled sap of the blackmur tree and small amounts of animal serum. He notes an immediate transformation. Her pupils expand beyond the iris. Her hair darkens. For 1 minute she ceases respiration, then resumes with steadier rhythm than before. She says only it's quieter now. Ferris's annotations, written in the margins more than a century later, reveal his obsession with the case. In red pencil, he underlined every reference to the blackmur compound, adding, "likely precursor to preservation serum discovered beneath the well." This compound merges vegetal and human elements, possible proto-biological synthesis. What Hensley had attempted was, in effect, the merging of plant and human tissue, a crude 19th-century genetic grafting. Later entries describe Hensley's belief that life could be rerooted, that the decay of flesh was merely a failure of the body to remember itself. He called it the reclamation of origin. Asterisk, if blood is memory, he wrote, then transfusion is inheritance. By September 1848, his notes take on a frantic tone. He writes of voices in the still air, and a pulsing sound beneath the floors of the manor. Servants report Catherine speaking to the walls and emerging with hands damp, though the bricks were dry. In one letter, he confesses to Ferris, "I have drained the well thrice, but it fills again from no discernible source. Each time the water grows darker. Each time I feel her heart beating in the ground." That same month, he writes of a final attempt, combining his own blood with his daughter's to perfect the continuum. After that, his letters stop. The last document is dated December 2nd, 1848, a death certificate for both Catherine and Dr. Hensley, signed by the county coroner. The cause reads only, exsanguination under unknown circumstances. When Elias Warren Cross referenced these records, he found the certificate missing from county archives. The registry jumps from November 27th to December 10th, with no mention of either name. He theorized that the Hensley experiment, later known through rumor as the Langford Preservation, was quietly expunged from official history after the family's estate was seized in 1850. One passage in Elias's notes, dated only night before excavation, stands out. What if the well is not a place, but a host, a living organ beneath the property, preserved by generations of the same bloodline? Each transfusion, each experiment, a ritual of continuity. The blood never died, it simply adapted. He had underlined continuity twice. Months after his disappearance, a state archivist reviewing the Warren papers experienced severe chemical burns while handling one of the letters. The ink had bled through its envelope, releasing a faint vapor. Tests revealed traces of mercury and something else, an organic compound similar to decayed hemoglobin. After that incident, the remaining letters were sealed in vacuum cases and stored under quarantine classification B9, accessible only by university clearance. But digital scans remain. One image shows an unmarked sketch found on the back of Hensley's final correspondence. A human figure with roots in place of veins, its heart branching downward into the ground, connecting to a circular reservoir labeled the Seat of Recollection. To the scholars who have since studied it, this figure resembles a hybrid between an anatomical chart and a map. The proportions match the Blackthorn estate's lay out precisely, the manor positioned where the heart would be, the well directly beneath it. When the chart is overlaid onto Ferris's excavation grid, the alignment is perfect. The cellar matches the heart cavity, the tunnels correspond to arteries. The Seat of Recollection lies exactly where the melted depression was found. It was never a metaphor. The house itself was built as an organism. Elias Warren's last field recorder captures him reading the first letter aloud. Between the words, there's a faint, wet clicking sound, steady, rhythmic. His breathing quickens, then a voice, childlike, repeats one phrase 3 times. It's quieter now. The recording ends abruptly with a sound like dripping. The next morning, his cot was empty. Only the folio remained damp to the touch, though the tent around it was dry. In 2014, a state document quietly reclassified the Blackthorn property as a biological containment site. Its soil still unfit for agriculture, its groundwater showing traces of iron and hemoglobin centuries after the fire. The official reason, residual contamination from 19th century medical waste. Unofficially, local maintenance workers refused to mow near the fence line. They claimed the grass grows faster overnight, thicker where the well used to be. One groundskeeper quit after slicing his hand on a rusted pipe, and swore the wound closed itself before he reached the truck. Some say the blood remembers, others say it waits. Beneath the ash, beneath the brick, something still pulses. Low, patient, ancestral, and if you press your ear to the ground on quiet nights, you can still hear it counting. The Anatomist's Prayer, the journal of Dr. Tobias Hensley, recovered in fragments from the foundations of the Blackthorn estate, was first examined in 1972 by the Department of Historical Pathology at the University of Virginia. Its cover had fused to the surrounding clay, forming a leathery, almost organic texture that one researcher described as similar to tanned hide, but still faintly warm. The pages that survived, 39 in total, were soaked through with an amber substance that resisted every known solvent. Even after sterilization, it emitted a faint pulse detectable on sensitive instruments, matching the rhythm of a human heartbeat at rest. At the top of the first intact page, written in looping script, were the words, "The body must remember what the soul forgets." Hensley's early entries are clinical, precise, detailing bloodletting, bone grafts, and the distillation of plant resins for preservation of spirit through matter. But gradually, the tone shifts from observation to confession. He begins to describe a prayer of binding, a procedure intended to restore dying tissue by forcing it to recall its original form. It required three elements: the donor's blood-living memory, the recipient's marrow ancestral form, a medium of convergence. The black myrrh sap, extracted at midnight, the process was less medical than sacramental. Each step was marked by recitation, as if invoking a saint rather than performing surgery. The prayer must not be spoken but felt, he wrote. One must listen until the marrow answers. In one experiment, dated August 9, 1848, Hensley records the transfusion of his own blood into that of his daughter Catherine, believing that shared lineage would make the union seamless. Her veins accepted it, he writes. No rejection, no fever. For 3 days she slept. On the fourth, her eyes opened black as the well. She smiled, though she had no breath. Below this entry, in fainter handwriting, another line appears, as if written by a different hand. Father says I am new again, but my dreams smell of earth. The ink matches Hensley's, but the phrasing suggests Catherine wrote it. By late September, Hensley's entries grow fevered. He writes of hearing the pulse beneath the boards, and of shapes forming within the myrrh resin, faces, sometimes his own. He records a vision seen during the final binding. I saw myself reflected in her eyes, but I was older, and she was not Catherine. She was all that came before her, each blood, each vessel, each cry buried in the ground. I had not healed her. I had awakened the house. That same night, the servants fled. 2 were found miles away, incoherent, their skin covered in branching red lines that resembled veins. Both died within a week. A separate section of the journal, titled Catechism of Flesh, reads like scripture, short verses, anatomical sketches, and invocations written in alternating Latin and English. The most intact passage is marked Psalm 9 of the body. The heart is a mirror. The mirror must be fed. Feed it memory, and it shall never die. Later analysis confirmed that the sketches were not merely symbolic. The measurements correspond precisely to those of a human thoracic cavity, suggesting Hensley was designing a vessel, perhaps even a substitute for a heart. Ferris's margin notes, written in 1968, identify this section as prototype of synthetic organ likely intended to sustain blood indefinitely. But the final drawings depict something more disturbing, a network of veins spreading outward like roots, terminating in a circular reservoir, the well. He had drawn the manor itself as a living organism once again, veins leading from every room toward a single subterranean heart. The last coherent entry in Hensley's journal reads simply, "The prayer is complete. The marrow answered." Beneath that line, the ink spreads in branching patterns, as though the page had absorbed it alive. In 1983, during a secondary study, one of the sealed pages was accidentally punctured by a microprobe. A droplet of liquid seeped out, dark, viscous, and faintly luminous. The researcher who touched it reported feeling a surge of warmth and memory, claiming to see faces that were not mine but remembered me. He was hospitalized 2 days later with severe hematologic abnormalities. His blood cells had altered morphology, slightly elongated, resembling root tendrils under magnification. The sample from the journal, when analyzed, contained both human DNA and chlorophyll traces, a botanical genome partially merged with human, one scientist concluded. A hybrid impossible by natural process. The pages were resealed, the study halted. Decades later, Dr. Miriam Ellison, a molecular biologist and distant relative of Elias Warren, requested access to the restricted materials for a paper on 19th century transfusion lore. She described the journal as almost humming when handled and noted a strange emotional response, as though the text wanted to be read aloud. Her voice notes capture her reciting a fragment of the prayer of binding. After the third repetition, there's a faint tapping, 3 knocks, then a fourth, softer, closer. The recording ends with her whisper. It remembers its own name. She resigned from the university 3 weeks later. Her official statement cited prolonged auditory hallucinations. The prayer of binding has since been reconstructed from her transcript. Flesh return to root, root return to flesh. Let the marrow recall its making. Blood be the language of memory, heart become the mouth that speaks it. When recited backwards, the phonetic sequence forms a rhythm identical to a heartbeat. Historians now believe the ritual was performed not just for healing but as a covenant, an exchange between body and earth. To preserve one, the other must be fed. In the margins of her transcript, Ellison scrawled a single note in pencil before abandoning the project. They were not praying to God. They were praying to the body. And so the curse of Blackthorn is revealed not as divine punishment but biological recursion, life devouring itself to stay alive. Even now, the soil around the manor pulses faintly in seismic readings. The state dismisses it as groundwater fluctuation, but those who have gone near at night tell the same story, a low hum beneath the earth, steady as a heartbeat, and sometimes, if you listen closely, a whisper answers back. The marrow remembers. The descent. In the autumn of 2019, the Virginia Historical Preservation Board authorized a limited re-examination of the Blackthorn site, under the guise of a soil stability survey for nearby construction. Officially, it was a geological operation, funded quietly by the Department of Environmental Restoration. Unofficially, it was led by Dr. Miriam Ellison, who had re-emerged after 16 years of silence. She appeared changed, thin, almost translucent under the field lights, her pupils dilated even in daylight. Colleagues described her manner as polite, methodical, but distant, like a person practicing how to be human. She refused digital equipment, insisting on analog recorders and hand-drawn notes. The excavation began at dawn on October 14, 2019, exactly 171 years to the day after Hensley's final journal entry. The first week yielded nothing unusual, charred brick, pottery fragments, and melted iron fixtures. But beneath the lowest layer of ash, the soil shifted color, from gray to a deep, maroon hue that tested high in iron and protein content. Ellison wrote in her field journal, "The earth smells faintly of meat left too long in rain. When I press my palm into it, I feel warmth that is not mine." The crew's temperature gauges confirmed localized heat at specific intervals, a rhythmic fluctuation every 6 seconds. Ferris had recorded a similar pattern in 1968. By the 10th day, the team reached the well. It appeared exactly as the earlier reports described, circular, blackened brick and impossibly smooth at the rim as if melted by internal heat. But unlike before, it was not empty. A thin film of liquid shimmered across the bottom, dark, viscous, and almost mirror-like. When illuminated, the surface rippled, distorting the reflection of the lamps as though the light were being absorbed. Ellison descended first. Her team begged her to wait for safety clearance, but she dismissed them. "If the blood remembers," she said, "then it will remember me." The descent was recorded on 8mm tape, one of 3 reels recovered later. The footage is grainy, but her voice is steady. You can hear the creak of the rope and the echo of her breathing as she lowers herself into the dark. At 20 feet, she stops. "There's a pulse," she says. Not sound. Pressure. Every few seconds it pushes back like the air is exhaling. She continues downward until the walls close in. Then the camera shakes. Her voice softens. Something's moving in the brick. It looks like veins. No roots, they're wet. The reel ends abruptly when the light flickers out. The second reel begins 6 minutes later from the surface, showing the rope trembling as though something below were breathing through it. When the crew pulled it up, it came slick with a dark substance that smelled of rust and sap. Ellison was gone. Her recorder, however, was retrieved days later, found half, buried in mud several yards from the well, still intact. The final minutes of audio are transcribed as follows. Static, dripping sounds, Ellison. Walls are soft now. There's light but no source. It's like being inside a lung. A long pause, Ellison. There's a face, not human. It looks like muscle turned inside out. Unidentified voice, childlike. It's quieter now. Ellison, Catherine, wet movement, low hum. Heart beat like rhythm, Ellison. I think I understand. It wasn't preservation, it was gestation. Sudden distortion, screaming metal noise, Ellison. The marrow, silence. Recording ends. After her disappearance, the site was sealed under federal mandate. The excavation pit was filled with quicklime and concrete, and the surrounding acre designated Hazard Zone B. The report was never released publicly, but leaked correspondence between field staff indicates that biological material continued to appear along the perimeter weeks after burials, small nodules of red clay that bled when cut open. One worker, Daniel Kipp, later wrote anonymously online, "We were told to dig soil samples, but what we found wasn't soil, it pulsed, it was warm, and when I put my shovel down, something grabbed the handle from underneath." His account was dismissed as hysteria. He quit the following day. 3 months later, winter floods exposed parts of the buried chamber. Local children playing nearby found a piece of brick washed downstream, smooth, faintly translucent, and bearing an imprint of a human face. Tests confirmed that the material contained both clay and collagen, the structural protein found in human skin. That sample now sits in a locked drawer at the Richmond Anthropological Archive. When placed near heat, it emits a soft, rhythmic vibration, 60 beats per minute. The only remaining artifact recovered from the 2019 dig is a torn sheet of paper from Ellison's field journal. The handwriting trails off midway through a sentence. It isn't a curse at all, it's a system. We were just its. The rest is obscured by a dark stain. Under ultraviolet light, faint words appear near the bottom margin. The house still breathes. The Blackthorn site remains officially inaccessible, monitored by private security under government contract. No one has been granted clearance since 2020, yet hikers along the ridge have reported hearing sounds through the ground on calm nights, a low, wet hum, followed by 3 slow knocks. A few claim to see movement in the soil itself, as if something massive and buried were shifting just below the surface. One witness described seeing a faint, glowing outline beneath the mud, a figure with arms extended, head bowed, as though reaching upward from below. When authorities returned the next morning, they found only an indentation, circular and wet, exactly where the original well once stood. They say if you stand there at dusk, the air feels warmer. The ground swells with each breath of the wind. And if you whisper her name, Catherine, the soil seems to listen. For a moment everything goes still. Then comes the faintest reply, deep and distant. It's quieter now. The recollection, the year is 2022, and the world has mostly forgotten Blackthorn. The land lies beneath the creeping roots of second-growth forest, marked only by a rusted warning fence and a single sunken sign that reads federal property, no entry. But memory is not so easily buried. The story begins again with Anna Hensley, a postgraduate student at the University of Pennsylvania, who had been studying 19th-century genealogies of Southern Virginia. She was not searching for her own family, at least not at first. Her research focused on the psychological rhetoric of inheritance in early American letters. Yet one evening, as she combed through microfilmed correspondence, she found the name Dr. Thaddeus Blackthorn scrawled in the margin of a digitized letter from 1848. The letter was addressed to a C.H., and beneath it, almost illegible, someone had written in later ink, "She lived, the marrow endures." Anna froze. Her great-grandmother's maiden name was Hensley, and in her family's oral history there had always been talk of a Catherine Hensley, a woman who vanished before the war. No one ever spoke of her after that. She ordered the physical archive copy, only to learn that it was restricted. The curator referred her to a digital repository in Richmond, claiming the original was under quarantine for biological residue. That phrase alone would have been enough to draw her in. Within a month, she was in Virginia, standing before the shuttered blackthorn site. The autumn air felt strangely humid, the ground beneath her boots soft, almost spongy. Her GPS marked the coordinates of the old well, though it was now buried beneath soil and thorn. She placed her hand to the earth, half expecting to feel nothing. Instead, the ground throbbed faintly, like a distant pulse. She whispered, "Catherine," not sure why she did. Something beneath the soil responded with a single, almost imperceptible sigh. That night, in her motel room, Anna reviewed the Hensley genealogy. There was a gap from 1848 to 1873, where every record of Catherine simply stopped. But below that, a sudden reappearance, a child listed only as Miriam, born of C. Hensley, Philadelphia. It didn't make sense. Catherine had disappeared before reaching Pennsylvania, unless she had never escaped the curse, unless it had followed her. 2 days later, Anna located the Richmond Anthropological Archive, the same institution that had catalogued Ellison's recovered artifacts. The archivist on duty, a thin man with cataract-clouded eyes, seemed surprised when she mentioned the Blackthorn site. "That name's been scrubbed from the database," he murmured. "We were told it was a forgery, but sometimes the drawers hum." He led her to a back room where he unlocked a small steel cabinet. Inside lay a sealed glass case containing a brick-like object, the one found downstream in 2019. Under fluorescent light, it appeared dull red. Under the faint warmth of her hands, however, it began to pulse. The archivist stared, mouth tightening. It never did that for anyone else. He whispered. Then he left the room, alone. Anna pressed closer. The faint pulse synchronized with her heartbeat. A small plaque beneath the case read, "Sample 9B source unconfirmed, do not expose to body heat." Ignoring protocol, she unlatched the lid. The air filled with the faint scent of copper and wet leaves. The surface rippled, something inside the clay, something under it, shifted almost as if turning toward her touch. Then came a whisper, soft and terribly intimate. "It's quieter now." Anna stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of catalog boxes. When she looked again, the brick had stopped pulsing, but there was something written in condensation on the glass lid. Words forming and fading within seconds. "We remember you, Miriam." The name chilled her. Miriam Ellison, the missing archaeologist from 2019, the same name that appeared in her Hensley line 3 generations earlier. She searched Ellison's professional records, and what she found made her heart seize. Miriam's mother was listed as Sarah Ellison nee Hensley. The bloodline had never left. It had simply renamed itself. Anna began to dream. Every night she stood in a long corridor, its walls slick and red, its air wet and breathing. A woman's voice whispered through the dark, "Don't let them bury it again." By the 4th night the dream changed. She was no longer walking. She was rising through soil and ash, her lungs full of cold water. And above her a light flickered like a heartbeat. She woke gasping, her bed sheets soaked in crimson mud that vanished when the lights came on. She returned to the site one last time on November 12, 2022, exactly 174 years after Catherine's escape attempt. The fence was gone, half swallowed by kudzu. She found the depression where the well had been and dug with her bare hands until her nails broke. The soil bled. Under the moonlight, the texture of the ground shifted, no longer dirt but something softer, almost porous, like flesh. A faint outline appeared beneath her palms, a hand mirroring hers. It pressed upward. "Anna," a voice murmured from below. "You came back." The final moments of that night are known only through a voicemail recovered from Anna's phone, timestamped 2:43 a.m. Her voice is trembling but clear. "I think she's alive." "No, she's not. It's something else. I can hear all of them underneath. It's like a choir made of breath. I see the faces. I see. Static consumes the rest." The call lasted 4 minutes before cutting out. Her phone was later found half a mile from the site, embedded in the trunk of a dead tree. Her body was never recovered. 6 months later, hikers reported new growth spreading from the Blackthorn property. Black ivy that shimmered faintly red at dusk, even under cloud. Soil samples taken from the area show elevated levels of hemoglobin and collagen. Everywhere the roots reach, birds stop singing, and deep in the earth, something continues to breathe. It isn't a curse at all. Ellison had written before she vanished. It's a system. Now it seems that system has found a new host. The inheritance. They say the ground at Blackthorn has stopped moving. But if you stand there long enough, if you wait past midnight when the air becomes thin and the crickets fall silent, you can feel the soil breathing beneath your feet. The last known record of the site comes from May 2023, when a joint team of environmental engineers and forensic pathologists was sent to contain what they termed a subterranean fungal outbreak. The report, obtained through anonymous sources, was redacted almost entirely. Only the first paragraph remains legible. An organic substrate of unknown taxonomy continues to spread beneath the former foundation. It demonstrates synchronized rhythmic contractions consistent with cardiac tissue. Specimens exhibit human mitochondrial DNA. The report ends there. The house that remembered in the spring of that same year a young contractor named Michael Granger Runo, aware of the site's history, was hired to assist with ground testing near the river. He found the remnants of the old Blackthorn well under 6 inches of sediment and rusted piping. The metal still pulsed faintly when struck. Inside the shaft, wedged between stones, he found a glass vial sealed with wax. The liquid inside was black, dense as oil. He turned it in his hands. The bottom bore a scratched engraving, A.H. It would be another month before investigators realized those initials matched Anna Hensley. Within weeks of contact, Granger reported vivid dreams to his supervisor, dreams of a pale figure standing beneath the river, hair drifting like seaweed, eyes open and empty. He said she was mouthing his name, though the sound came from the earth instead of her lips. By June, the project was quietly discontinued. Roman 2. The blood test, unbeknownst to Granger, samples taken from his skin and hair, after he developed unexplained lesions, were sent to the University of Pennsylvania's pathology department. The results confused everyone. The DNA sequences were human, yet showed allelic patterns identical to early 19th century specimens collected from the Blackthorn Medical Archive. We appear to be observing a continuous genetic thread, wrote Dr. Amelia Cho in her report, as though the material self replicates through contact, not conception. When Cho attempted to destroy the slides, she found the cells multiplying beneath the glass, forming tiny, translucent lattices, almost architectural in shape. She withdrew the sample under a microscope and swore she heard something whispering. Closer, it said, Roman 3. The surviving line, one name appeared again and again in the archival cross. References, Catherine Hensley, the woman who vanished in 1848. Another appeared alongside it in recent genealogical databases, Miriam Ellison, born 1989. A genetic link was confirmed by private testing in 2021, months before Miriam's disappearance. She had been aware of her lineage. In one recovered voice memo, found on her old field recorder, Miriam says softly, I think it's in the marrow, not just metaphor, actual memory encoded in bone. Catherine wrote about it first, but they burned her notes. I can still hear her humming when I sleep. She pauses, then adds almost tenderly, it's not evil, it's just hungry. Roman 4. The Black Heart after Anna's disappearance. The federal investigation reclassified Blackthorn as a biohazard containment site. But locals still pass the perimeter fence at night, hearing rhythmic noises beneath the soil, like wet machinery or the slow closing of enormous lungs. A single photograph leaked online shows what appears to be a network of root-like growths beneath the old foundation, black cords threaded with faint red veins. Some claim to see human faces preserved in the bark, others insist it's pareidolia. Yet one image, enhanced and color-corrected, reveals a distinct profile, female with eyes open, mouth slightly parted. The timestamp on the metadata reads 2022-11-12, the night Anna vanished. The return by autumn, the first symptoms began to spread in neighboring counties. Cattle born with translucent bones, Infants whose fingernails grew black, skin biopsies that showed anomalous tissue patterns identical to the samples found in 1848. The Department of Health called it a localized fungal condition. The press called it the crimson blight. But the few who'd studied the Blackthorn case knew better. They began finding the same whisper in recordings buried under static. The marrow endures, VI. The unraveling Michael Granger was last seen in September 2023, standing waist, deep in the river behind the containment zone, staring downstream. His body was never recovered. Only his boots were found, still pulsing faintly. A search of his motel room revealed pages of handwritten notes, one phrase repeated dozens of times: "The house is under us now." He'd drawn a crude map in pencil, the same lay out as the Blackthorn Manor floor plan, but inverted, as though buried beneath the land instead of built atop it. At the map's center he had written one word: Mother, Romans 7, the closing file by the end of that year. All physical records of the Blackthorn estate were removed from public access. Only fragments remain in obscure academic papers and privately circulated files. The final entry in the sealed report comes from Dr. Cho herself, dated December 31, 2023. It isn't infection, it's inheritance. Every contact, every replication. His memory reorganizing matter. What Catherine began, the ground completed. The human form is merely a convenient archive. The page ends in black streaks, as though her pen had sunk through wet paper. Roman 8. Present-day locals in Culpeper County still whisper about the red mist that clings to the river on cold mornings, and the way the soil seems to breathe if you listen closely. Children dare each other to press an ear to the dirt. Some claim if you stay still long enough, you can hear voices murmuring beneath the earth. Soft, desperate, unending. They're not praying, they're remembering. Do not dig near the river, do not follow the roots. If you hear the hum, run. It's not the ground moving, it's the house waking up.